Hello, welcome to Light in the Darkness. The Word of God says in Psalm number 119, verse 130, that at the opening of God's Word, light comes forth, and it gives understanding to the simple. Here at Light in the Darkness, we like to shine light into those areas in your life where you may be confused, or things may be happening that you don't understand, or you may just need a better reflection of what's going on in your life so you can navigate some challenges different. My name is Scott.
And my name is Jennifer. Thank you so much for tuning in to our podcast. We're here to discuss a great topic again, and it's concerning relationships. So we have like 5 top skills that is very good for a healthy relationship and for you to apply to your lives or take on this skill. So Scott, the first one that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, well, the first one we're going to talk about, and these are not necessarily in a systematic order, but they are skills that you need in order to be effective in handling relationships. And the first one we're going to be looking at is empathy. Now, empathy sounds like sympathy, but it's different. Empathy is it's like putting yourself in someone else's place. When someone is sharing with you, the Bible talks about we rejoice with those who rejoice and we weep with those who weep. There are times when someone is going through something. It could be a loss of a loved one. It could be a bad situation in life. There could be anything that could cause us to be feeling emotionally down. And as we're feeling emotionally down, then, a lot of times we don't want, there's nothing somebody else can do to fix it. But we do like somebody to empathize with us, and what that does is somebody can come alongside and they can kind of relate, not to necessarily everything that you're feeling, but they can have a similar experience, would enable people to connect and say, you know what, hey, I feel your pain. I feel your pain. And so they can give a word of encouragement and word of help. So the Bible talks about in Hebrews chapter 13, Hebrews chapter 4, in verse 15, it says, we have a high priest, was talking about Jesus, who can be touched with the feelings of our infirmity. That word feelings of our infirmity, that is the word for empathy. Right. In other words, whatever you're going through, God knows what that is. He knows how it feels because he once was a man and he felt everything that we feel. Yes. So a lot of times you just need someone to come alongside and just feel what you feel, to kind of give you some encouragement, to let you know, hey, that you're not in this alone, and that you can get through it. And so that's kind of what empathy is. Yes,
and that's very important when we have our relationship with our friends, our spouse, and with anyone, your coworker, to have that empathy. So empathy brings about understanding where that person is in their life, in their situation, where they are as an individual, when they're relating to you in a relationship. So we have that, relationship, especially when you're in a relationship with a significant other, your fiance, your husband, wife. You want to understand that person, and that's part of relating to that person. Yeah. So that they can empathize as to where you are at and understand you so much better. Yeah. So when we have empathy, it goes a long way. Scott talks about, Christ and how he, gave his life for us, because he loved us so much. And a part of that love is to where he loved us, that he gave us an opportunity to choose life or death. So being empathetic, to give us to understand us as an individual. Our Creator made us, and he understood and wanted us to have a chance to choose life or death. So he empathized by giving us that choice.
Okay.
So empathy.
Yeah. Okay. And again, empathy is, of course, us putting ourselves, like I said, in someone else's place and seeing things from their eyes. Because when we can see things from their eyes, I think we can better relate to what they're dealing with. So a lot of times with empathy, the necessary step is the next skill that we're going to be looking at, which is communication. And it's in communication, where we express our thoughts, our feelings, and our emotions about an experience that we may be going through, or a concept that we may have, or something like that. And oftentimes what we're looking for is, as Jennifer said, we're looking for someone to hear us and to understand where we're coming from. Is oftentimes, you know, a lot of times we have a challenge expressing our thoughts. We're sharing our thoughts and we're wanting the person to understand them, but behind those thoughts are feelings and emotions. And so the feelings and emotions along with the thought give the person a pretty good concept of what's going on. So empathizing, yes, but in order to empathize, there has to be communication. And so it's with communication that we are able to connect with each other. Because when you can understand where I'm coming from and I can understand where you're coming from without it being judgmental, without it being critical, or without a person saying, well, I just don't agree with that. Because when you're communicating, the first level of communication is not so much as to get the person to agree with your train of thought, agree with your mindset, agree with your concepts or your ideas. But what a person wants to do is they want to be heard and they want to be understood. When they're heard and understood, they feel accepted. They feel like, okay, you value me, you appreciate me because you value my ideas. Now, I don't have to agree with the idea. That's not the goal. That initial goal is, hey, I hear what you're saying and I understand now why I understand your thinking and I understand your reasoning, and I can even understand now why you are doing what you're doing. And so that's one of the things that communication gives us. It gives us the ability to connect with another person from their perspective, not with us judging or condemning that person, but us understanding that person and say, okay, because, you know, we all have different ideas about how we do things. But just because your idea doesn't agree with mine doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. We can use a blend of the two to come up with something that's even better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's important with that communication piece, and the empathetic part goes along with it so that you can have a good relationship when you're understanding, when you're feeling, putting yourself in their shoes and empathizing with what they're feeling so that you can better understand where they're at. Because some people jump to conclusions before they hear the whole story or to understand where that person is coming from. And if they don't understand where that person is coming from, they jump to conclusion, then you got a disconnect, right? And you got this where you're having, you know, conflict with each other. And you don't want to go into that conflict part until you understand where they're at. Because, you know, when you jump to conclusion, it's too late. You done got upset, you got angry, you're mad over something that you really don't understand. So that's why it's important to, you know, hear and understand where that person is coming from so you can empathize with them. And even if you don't empathize with them, try to understand where they're at so that the conflict won't come and, you know, you lose that relationship. Right. So there's another piece that we're going to talk about is the conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is where there's a conflict, and it's you know, resolving the differences between the individual, you and another person. And once that you find out what the conflict is, you have to actually look at yourself, because usually it comes from the inside. There's a conflict going on the inside of you that you would need to examine yourself, do some self-reflection as to what is this conflict, where is it coming from, or why did I get upset? You know, versus what that person just spoke or said to me. Why did I get upset? Because they said this to me. And I have to examine what's the conflict on the inside of me to actually come to that conclusion to get a resolution. And a key thing is what you said, differences, resolving the differences between people, because we are different. And when we recognize and accept and value and appreciate the differences, it can bring about a healthy connection, a healthy relationship, and people can then benefit from each other. So when we look at conflict resolution, which is the third of the 5, that we like to separate them, because we like to separate and say, hey, there is the conflict and there's the resolution. Until you resolve the conflict, it's almost impossible to get a resolution, because most people, when they have a conflict with
an individual that they're trying to connect with or to communicate with or understand with. The reason they have a conflict is because there is something on the inside of the person. So whenever there's a conflict between two people, as Jennifer was saying, we have to first of all look into ourselves and say, hey, why is it bothering me because of what this person is saying or their way of thinking or their attitude or their disposition? Because it's not what the other person is saying or thinking or doing that bothers us. It's always how we take it. When we take what someone else is saying the wrong way, it rubs us the wrong way. When it rubs us the wrong way, then our feelings get involved. And when our personal feelings get involved, then oftentimes we'll blame the way we are feeling personally on the other person and saying, well, it was what you said that caused me to feel this way.
Exactly.
And it's really not. It's really not what the other person is saying. It's how I'm taking what they are saying.
Right.
But if I'm listening not to try to agree with what the person is saying, but really to understand what the person is conveying to me, I can understand and say, hey, I understand your thought process, even though I don't agree with it. It doesn't have to become a conflict. But to resolve the conflict, to get a resolution, we have to first look inward, as Jennifer said, and reflect and say, you know, I know why that bothers me, because that triggers in me the memory of this, and then when it rubs me the wrong way, I have to take responsibility for how I'm feeling, because if I don't, I'm going to want you to take responsibility for how I'm feeling, and then I'm going to try to change the way you're thinking or feeling so I can be okay. And now I'm trying to control another person, and the only person I can control in that exchange is myself.
Right, exactly. And that's important that you learn this, right?
Yeah.
This skill to, you know, because we go along life and a lot of things trigger on the inside of us, and we don't realize it.
Right.
We don't realize that these triggers happen
Right.
every day,
Yeah.
you know, in communicating or just, you know, some things trigger in your thought process that you have to, you know, examine. What is it now? Why am I feeling sad?
Yeah.
There's a conflict on the inside of me that I thought that I had that made me feel sad
Yeah.
because of the way that I was thinking. So
Yeah.
resolving that conflict on the inside, finding out where it's coming from,
Yeah.
and say, I was thinking about this. Oh, I was thinking about my mom, and she's not here no more. She passed on, and it made me feel sad.
Right.
Now I'm feeling sad because now I recognize now that's why I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling. Now I have to bring myself to that, you know, that process of thinking, oh, I love my mom. I missed the time that we shared together, but I'm gonna think on the good things.
Yeah.
The good things that we did, and how that woman knew she can cook. She knew how to cook for the family, and she knew how to bring us all together.
Right.
So we think of those things to make our feelings, you know, come back to a good place.
Yeah, because our feelings are not self-producing. Our feelings come from the way we think. So when we think a certain way, our thoughts produce feelings. And oftentimes we try to change the feelings without, as Jennifer was saying, going back and getting in tune and in touch with the source of the thought that's producing the feelings. And we like to use, when we counsel, one of the things that we like to use is the example of a dog. A person would say they were attacked or bitten by a dog when they were 5 or 6 or 7 years of age. And the dog, they were scared and they ran home, you know, crying and everything else like that. And they were traumatized by the experience with a dog when they were 5, 6, or 7 years of age. Then they could go forward 20 years and say they are now 25, 27, 30 years old, and they are walking down the street and they see a dog. Now, they can get fearful of the dog and either want to hit the dog and hurt the dog or run from the dog with their fight or flight. But it's not the dog that they are seeing at age 27 that's causing the problem. It's their experience of the dog that they had at 5 or 7 that's causing them the problem. And if they don't realize that, then they'll think the dog is causing them to be fearful. And they're actually fearful because of a bad experience. And those experiences that are triggered in us when we see something in the present is what we call them exactly that. They are triggers. And so then somebody can say, well, why are you afraid of dogs? And you say, well, I don't like dogs. And then you can, oh, you know what? I was attacked by a dog when I was young. And I drew a conclusion that what? All dogs would attack me, so I'm afraid of all dogs, even though it was just that one dog. And so we can have experiences. We can take it from a dog to a person that hurt us, a mother, a father, a sister, a brother, someone else. And when we get hurt by a person, someone else comes along years later and can do something to trigger the memory of that, and we can find ourselves reacting toward that person the same way we would react toward someone else in our past, because we don't make the separation between the two.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when those things happen, it also affects, like you said, the relationship that we have, and we bring that into the relationship. And the next topic that we're going to talk about goes into is commitment.
Yeah.
And sometimes when it comes to, trying to figure out what's going on inside of us, we figure out we can't commit to a relationship because we have something that has happened in our past that made us fearful, afraid. Fearful, afraid is the same thing. And the pain and the hurt and all those things that we experience in our past cause us to be skeptic about committing.
Yeah.
So
And a commitment is necessary in order for a relationship to be healthy. Because commitment says what? I'm not in this for just to see if it's going to go okay and then bail out. If you want a healthy relationship, you have to commit to the long term. And you say, hey, are there going to be bumps? Are there going to be bruises? Are there going to be hurts and pains that you're going to experience? Yes. But when that happens, that's where we go again to the empathy, the communication, and the conflict resolution, so that we can get past that and get to the point where I can say, hey, so when you said that you weren't trying to hurt me, that's just how you talk. You elevate your voice because you grew up in a family that did that. I grew up in a family and I didn't ever see my parents, raise their voice at one another. So when you raise your voice at me, it triggered in me something and I didn't know how to handle it. But I'm committed. So then what happens with commitment, we look at a challenge and we say, hey, what do we need to do to get through this challenge so that we can get back on a harmonious situation and we can move forward in our relationship. So commitment says what? I'm not going to just abandon this thing every time my feelings get hurt. I'm not going to abandon this thing because things not going my way. Because then that puts us in a situation where we can't make any healthy relationship, because once we start running, we don't ever realize, as we were saying earlier, the frustration, the pain, the fear is on the inside of us, but we can make it the other person's problem and saying, well, I can't be around that person because they rubbed me the wrong way.
Exactly.
The only way somebody can rub us the wrong way is we give them the right to. And when we give them the right to do that and place this old big word that we use a lot, expectations on someone else to act like we want them to act so that we can be okay, we set ourselves up to be disappointed, because nobody's ever going to act like Jennifer or Scott likes them to act. They're going to act like they act. And so we then have to then do what? Communicate and get to understand them so that we can stay committed to the relationship, because most of the time people in a healthy relationship are not looking to hurt the other person, even though the pain happens, and we have to learn how to stay committed and work through it.
And like you said, that's why it's important for us to go back to the conflict resolution, that the conflict that's on the inside of us, and we learn how to communicate our feelings, our emotions, and be, one of the other things is be transparent. Being transparent in the relationship to let them know, hey, this is what, what's going on. Just like you said, we come from different backgrounds, different families, and things that we have experienced in our family relationships that we can bring over in the new relationship if we don't recognize those things. And a lot of times people don't recognize those things because they have it has been so on the inside of them.
They suppressed it.
It's suppressed on the inside of them to the point that they don't recognize that behavior that is going on from one relationship to the other. And if they don't recognize it, then they can damage the other person and themselves because of what they're going through, and they haven't recognized the conflict on the inside of them. So one of the things that we help our clients in sessions
is to help them to realize that most of the pain, the fear, and the frustration and how we react to it is developed in early childhood, in those formidable years between
Yes.
ages 1 through 12. And so we help them to go back and look at some of those experiences. And it's an eye-opening for a lot of people, because most people will say, well, yeah, that happened to me when I was young, but it don't bother me now. Or, yeah, my mom and dad got a divorce, or I was abused when I was young, but I've gotten past that. And you don't get past it, but you think you do because you're young, and when you're young, you can internalize it. You internalize the experience along with the thoughts that you told yourself and the feelings, that emotions, but you can't at a young age often sit there and draw effective and right conclusions.
Right.
So whatever conclusions you will draw will affect how you handle a relationship. So a lot of time couples can be talking and one person gets their feelings first and they'll shut down. And they'll pull away. And the other person will say, well, don't you pull away from me? And they may have experienced some abandonment issues growing up. And so when that person pulls away, it's triggering that in them. The other person might shut down because they said, hey, that's how I learned to handle stuff from growing up in my household. You didn't talk about your feelings. You kept them to yourself. So when we get to know ourselves well enough, which is what we have to do in order to be in a healthy relationship, then we can commit to that relationship.
Right.
And that commitment says then, you know what, I'm going to be responsible for how I take things.
Yes.
So I can deal with myself effectively. Because then that enables me to grow. That enables me to mature. Because then when something happens, I can maturely evaluate and do some self-reflect and say, you know what, yeah, that is bothering me. But it's not what you are doing. It's what you're doing is triggering in me, but I can then explain it to you and say, when you raise your voice, you know, that triggers in me what used to happen when my dad used to raise his voice at me. And I didn't like it, but I didn't say anything to my dad. But I didn't realize I internalized the fear of that, but I also internalized some anger. And when you do it and I get angry, I'm really not getting angry at you. It's just a trigger, and I have to learn how to control that. And the Bible says I can be angry and don't sin. So I can control myself, and then I can focus on you and find out what's going on with you.
Exactly. So that's good and well said. So we have to, you know, hold on to this and, you know, these skills that you're obtaining right now: commitment, conflict resolution, communication, and empathy. All of these works hand in hand with each other.
Right.
But the last one that we're going to talk about is that love. Sacrificing oneself for the welfare and well-being of the other person.
Even to the point of your own hurt.
Yes.
Because sacrifice is going to cost us. It wouldn't be a sacrifice if it didn't cost us. So a lot of times we get hurt, and rather than focusing on the pain from the person that's causing us the pain, we'll focus on our own pain, and will cause us then to pull away from that person, and we become more self-absorbed, more selfish and self-centered, and then that can cause a disconnection, and it goes back then into a conflict.
Right.
Because I'm focusing more on what you said and the pain that it caused me, versus thinking, if that person is saying something that's coming across painful, that means that there's something that they're dealing with. And what I can do then is focus on them to find out what's going on with them, and then I can help them resolve that conflict, and then I can share what's going on with me. But if you say something to offend me and I turn back and say something to offend you, we're just throwing gasoline on a fire. And it's going to blaze up and somebody going to get burned.
And you can't fight fire with fire, because you'll get nowhere, like you're saying. So the sacrificing piece helps when you learn to just focus on the other person. You focus on the other person and how they're feeling at the point to, you know, your own hurt has to be diminished. And we call that like dying to yourself, right?
Yeah.
Dying to your own emotions,
like
right? Dying to your own emotions and stuff to see, you know, and care for the other person, so that you can understand where they're coming from, what triggered the, you know, the hurt, the pain, the frustration on the inside of them, so that they can actually communicate. Sometimes we have people that are introvert and extroverts. So we have those introverts and extroverts that actually are in conversation together. And what you were talking about, if you have an introvert person, they can't respond so quickly like the extrovert. So the introvert may shut down and pull away and say, I can't handle this. So they just start to shut down. And the extrovert person has to just want to get it out and communicate and want it to, want a resolution right then and there. But when that happens, you have to allow yourself, each other, and respect each other. Going back to the empathy and all of that, to respect the other person and allow that person to have some time. The one that's an introvert, they need to think before, they speak out, and then allow that person to process, and then set a time to come back and say, let's just talk about this in about 30 minutes or an hour or so that we can, have our heads cleared and come back in a better, in our emotions are not so high, so we can think clearly and not, say things that we can't take back.
Yeah.
So,
and as we're concluding today, here's the thing we want you to understand about love, because love is the thing that bonds us together. Love is always one directional. It goes out. But here's the other thing. It's better to give than to try to take. True love always gives, and it doesn't place a demand or an expectation on the person that's receiving. So the Bible talks about it's more blessed to give than to receive. When you go into a relationship, if you go into a relationship to sow into the relationship, to benefit the other person, you'll have a better chance of making that relationship healthy versus going in there and you're broken and wounded and you're looking to get from the person, because then you're going to be a manipulator or a dominator or a coercer or a controller, trying to get somebody else to act the way you want them to act so you can be whole. So, oftentimes we find couples going into a relationship and both of them are wounded, and it's kind of like dog eat dog. They're destroying one another, trying to get each other to be what they need to be, and they have not taken responsibility for the pain that they're experiencing, and that's what causes the problem, because they're blaming their own wounds on someone else, and it may have been wounded by someone else, but I can't fix that in my relationship with you.
Exactly. So I hope you guys took away some skills that you can use, or you can take away all of them and use these skills in your relationships, because it will help you to have a healthy relationship. So we hope you enjoyed this podcast and that you will be coming back in the future to be with us. Go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Light in the Darkness, and you'll be able to catch every podcast that come out. Thank you for tuning in, and you enjoy your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.